Okay, so it's time for the first monthly theme critique of 2017, and as always, this is the system I'm going to use. The first criteria is, does it fit the theme? And this month's theme was called A Different Angle. And I think a lot of people maybe made this more difficult than it needed to be. The idea isn't to find a completely unique angle to take a photo from. That's probably about impossible. Almost everything's been done. It's more about working a scene. It's probably one of my biggest weaknesses in that I tend to have an image in mind and I take that image and then I go on about whatever's next. Instead of giving myself options and exploring the situation. So the intent here was really to explore the situation and come up with something immediately obvious to you. The second consideration is artistic and aesthetic factors, and these are pretty much all opinion. It's going to be, image appeal, composition, things like that. And then the last consideration is technical considerations, aperture, ISO, shutter speed, camera settings, and perhaps what could have been done better. Grading system is going to be A, I wish I had taken that picture. B, I would be happy with that picture. C, I probably wouldn't keep the picture unless it had some other attachment to it. And D, it meets the requirements but has major flaws. Alright, first image is my image, and obviously it's a somewhat unusual angle. See, camera settings, this was taken with a Nikon 1 V2, is at minimum ISO. It's at stop down slightly from f4.5. With a small sensor on the Nikon 1, you can't stop down too far before you start getting into diffraction. But with this subject, I don't even think diffraction would have mattered much because all of the textures are rather smooth, details are rather large, and the finer, smaller stuff doesn't really matter. So I could have possibly stopped down further for more depth of field or sharpness, but I was using a 12mm lens, which on the Nikon 1 is about a 35mm effective, but it is pretty much the widest lens I had capable. And I wanted to go wide angle. I wanted that perspective of being really close, and in the image it accomplishes what I wanted. It makes the front of the vehicle loom large and causes the rest to kind of fade off to the background. Aesthetically, this was a handheld bracketed shot because I knew I wanted to go HDR. I had backlit skies. I wanted to save those, and that was known at the time. I wanted the impression that you're about to be crawled over by this four-wheel drive van, and it's close. I got, I think the biggest thing I needed to do was get the vehicle higher. This is actually on top of about a 2-foot drop off, and I probably could have got lower than I did, but it wasn't a sudden drop off. It was a, I don't know, 45-degree slope. I needed a different place, like a more abrupt drop off that I could get both lower and closer at the same time to get exactly the perspective I wanted. I got a lot of good ideas when I posted this on the forum, or rather on Facebook for critique. Things like position it higher, maybe try it with the lights on, things like that. And I spent the rest of the month looking for a place where I could park this thing that would be more suitable for the vantage point, because without that, getting the perspective I wanted, the rest doesn't really matter. Now, when I took this photo, I had an image in mind. I did explore a couple angles, but then I took my series of shots and I went on. There was comments that maybe I should have taken this more from the front, tried different focal lengths to get tighter up under, those kind of things. And had I explored the situation from different angles, maybe one of those would have worked better. There's some other little things about the image that are less than ideal. Some could be fixed with editing, probably. This area here, the mud on the tire, I could have cleaned, because having tire treads filled in, the aggressive tire tread of the off-road tires is part of the idea of the vehicle in the image I wanted to convey. So having them packed up with mud, that's not ideal. Overall, as far as executing the image in terms of the theme, I get a C. You know, I looked at a couple angles, but I took one set of shots from this angle and left myself no options. I didn't even explore it in looking at it as much as I probably could have in positioning the vehicle and those kind of things. In terms of the image overall, you know, it's a bit tight on the top edge. There's more image off to this side, but there was stuff over here I didn't want to capture, so I composed it this way and cropped it to this aspect. You know, it's a C image for me, and I probably could have done better. The next image is by Heather, and I really like this image. It's a great perspective. It's a bright, sunny day, nice clear sky, blowing bubbles. So it has a nice, happy, summertime message, and it works well. It's a great, unique vantage point taken from below, which I think is really cool. Settings here, we've got 1/800th of a second, which is enough for the drifting bubbles, but it's ISO 400, which is creating a bit of noise in these areas, but not in the blue sky. We've got 47 millimeters on an 18 to 55. It's set at 6.3, so it's stopped down, so it's not maximum wide. I have no problem with these settings as such. Maybe a little faster shutter speed would require a little higher ISO. Overall, I don't think this noise is problematic, and we could reduce the noise pretty easily because this isn't, you know, a lot of detail here. So if we soften it with some noise reduction, detail, do some luminance reduction, get rid of some of that, it's really not going to affect the image significantly. And we could, of course, then use selective sharpening, bump that up, and then mask it off all of the areas where we don't want it, so we can reduce the noise and still retain sharpness where we need it pretty easily. So I think you could have gone higher on the ISO. Aesthetically, this hand here, so we've got the hand, is the largest, brightest area in the scene. So it has a lot of weight. It's drawing a bit of attention, and it's blocking the face. So that's a little bit of a negative. It's not huge because this isn't really about the child's face. We don't need eye contact or anything like that. So it's not a huge detractor, but I think maybe a different position. If it was on the shadow side, so it wasn't the brightest area, that would make the side of his face the brightest area, which makes his face and blowing the bubble more prominent, would be beneficial, or perhaps a different hand position entirely would be beneficial, or a different composition. What I did was I took the image over to Photoshop and I rotated it. So I've created I think this is a 5:7 aspect, I'm not sure. I forget what I used. No, it's a 2:3. So this is pretty much as it would have been in the camera. Pretty much as it would have been in camera if you compose it this way. It's cropped off more of the hand, which subdues that. It's a little tight on the face for me, but I didn't have image that I could create that with. And it places the bubbles at a diagonal, which creates a little more drama. And the other thing is, this is a 5:7 or 2:3 is a common aspect ratio, which is going to be easy to frame. Whereas here, this is going to require custom framing, custom matting, that kind of thing, in order to actually present this, print this and display it. So this has the added angle, easier format, has removed some of the hand, and if we go to a crop composition and put this to original as shot, put the overlays on it, you'll notice that we've got the bubbles leaving close to the 1/3, and we've got the major large bubble and grouping close to the other 1/3 intersection. So compositionally, that's a bit stronger. Additionally, this composition creates a feeling that the balloons are rising in the air, even though that's probably not the case. And they're rising because they're higher in the frame. If we had rotated this so that they were lower in the frame, they would feel like they were falling. So in the previous image, they're just kind of straight across, kind of flat. Like putting it at the diagonal, you get a little more feeling of lightness and rising up, which goes with the overall mood. A couple distractors, I think. The bubbles themselves are a bit busy in all the reflections. You've got an exterior reflection and an interior reflection. I think a lot of this is due to the time of day light. You can see the sun's just breaking the horizon of a building or whatever is starting to obstruct it, but the sun's rather low, and I think a different time of day would probably have reduced the amount of reflections in the bubbles. And I'm not entirely certain this is the child that is blowing the bubbles showing in here. So if there was another child standing there, that certainly could have been removed. I think it's probably asking too much to remove all these reflections in post, so I wouldn't bother. Overall, I give this image a solid B plus, A minus. It's well done, and I think this image has commercial applications. It would not surprise me to see this image used in advertising of some sort. Really nice job. Right, here we have an image by Michelle, and looking at the settings, I got a 75mm f1.8 set at 3.5 for sharpness. It has not extended the depth of field, and I don't think there's enough separation there that going for less depth of field would have been beneficial. And we got plenty of shutter speed, and ISO, I believe 200 is the minimum for this camera. So no issues with the settings. When I look at this image, I think the strong part of the image is down here. It's the feet, the worn shoes, and the tools. That's the part of the image that tells a story to me. The wash tub, a little. The frayed dress, a little. Consider them supporting. So for me, having the tool and the shoes so close to the edge is a negative. I want them moved up away from the edge. Generally, I want the main subject area or the subject as such about equidistant from two adjacent edges. So I would want this whole area moved up to right about here. So up and over just a bit. and that would cause a little loss here and a little loss here, or a different crop. Exposure wise, on my computer, it is too bright, too contrasty. Now nothing's clipped. Oh, there's a little bit back here. Nothing's clipped in here, but it's really washed out to a monotone, light gray, and for me that is a negative. So I think here I would pull highlights way down, blacks down a bit, bring the shadows up just a bit, somewhere in there, make them stand out a little more prominent in relation to the rest of the image. It brings out more of the detail in the area that to me tells the story the most. So I would do something along those lines. It's basically the difference from there to there. And you might want to bring up the total exposure after that's done. Something around there. Just help bring that out, the part that tells the story. Overall, for me, I give this image a B minus, in that range. Next image is by Ross. I had to steal this image, and I forget the EXIF Ross provided, but it was, I believe, an iPhone. So I really don't know much of anything about iPhone technically to say. All I can say is that looking at the image, first and foremost, aesthetic considerations. I like the angle, I like the message, I like watch children taking from the low children's perspective. I like the height and dominance, creates a like a dominant, powerful feeling to the warning sign. So I think the angle and everything there works really well. I don't mind the clipped corner, particularly if the sky got really dull further up, which it looks like maybe it did. But I might also prefer a little more along the top. The aspect ratio looks to be about square. It's probably not quite square. I guess it is exactly square. So again, it's going to be a little harder to frame, display in the home with printing, but that may not have been the intent anyways, or maybe it doesn't matter. Looking at this technically with the settings, there's not a lot of fine detail, and my guess is this is a fact of a black and white conversion of a JPEG captured in camera. I don't know that the lens and sensor combination on the phone has the ability to resolve really fine details at distance. But so this is a coarser image. I think this would kind of fall apart a little bit if it was displayed large, because there's just not a lot of texture. There's a lot of blocking out, so a lot of the darks are solid black, a lot of the whites are solid white, so it starts to get blocky. But I can't really say what you could do better with an iPhone, with a phone camera. There's a bit of noise in the background. You know, in a black and white conversion, it's kind of like film grain. It doesn't necessarily hurt, so you could take that out or leave it if you wanted to. You can certainly take it out, as it would not hurt this image at all. You know, there's no real fine detail here to lose, so reducing the noise in the background is not going to hurt anything else at all. So you could take it out if you wanted to or not. Conceptually and execution, you know, the angle, exploring the angle and all that, it's a strong image. I like how it looks here at this size. Heck, let's go with a B. You know, it may not be suitable for other applications, display methods, that kind of thing, printing. But that's not the intent. It's not a factor. So I give this one a B. Okay, the next image we have is by Glenn, and we're looking at a top of a coat rack. So definitely a unique perspective. Camera settings ISO 800, which is quite high for a static subject. Now, getting a camera support into this position could certainly be problematic, but again, it could be done. 17 millimeter on a 17 to 50 2.8, set to 3.5. Personally, I would have gone for more depth of field so that the details in the base or further down would be sharper. Additionally, it kind of looks like the sharpest area is down here in the lower rack, I guess. Instead of up here, I would prefer more depth of field, and of course the shutter speed would suffer, be very long, which would require the support. So I understand why the settings were chosen. Difficulty in putting a camera support in there so that you could go with a long shutter speed at low ISO, but doing so I think would have helped. Looking at the image, we've got the square crop, and feels a bit tight to me on these two sides. Maybe if it was rotated a bit, place these parallel the edge, that would give them a little more room. Might also make them a little tighter here and here. The tightness here and here, I believe that's stuff that's on the floor, and you could give it more space by being a little further away from the coat rack, so that might have helped. As it is, the image to me is a graphical image, so kind of towards an abstract, which isn't a bad thing at all, but for me it's losing information. Bring out more detail in the subject overall, and then we have the reflections of the overhead lighting on the floor, which we could eliminate, and it's a little gray, so we could fix that as well. I'll go ahead and bring up the highlights, maybe bring up the whites, try to get rid of those reflections. And now we do have pretty much all the background clipping out to white, which is not necessarily a negative. If we go to soft proofing, depending upon what we pick here for our paper, if we go to a matte, which is what I would use for nice rag matte paper for printing black and white, we don't have any issues with blowouts. The white just goes to paper white, and on a computer you can have pure white. So I don't, blowing that out to white's not a problem. It's gotten rid of those highlights, created a little more contrast, which is almost a negative. We'll bring up the shadows here, and I'd bring the clarity way up on this, make it a little stronger graphical. Maybe pull down the contrast. And maybe pull down the exposure overall just a touch. I don't know, somewhere in there. Looks like maybe something there needs cloned out. Some stuff here could be cleaned up. But overall, I think that's a better position. Let's see where we started at with this image. We started there, and now we're here. I think that works a little better. It's a little stronger, a little more graphical. And as such, for me, as a almost abstract graphical element, I think I would consider separating it from the background, expanding the background and placing it as like an abstract representation of the sun or a star or something along those lines. I think that could be pretty cool. Overall, I give this image a B. I think B minus maybe. When I look at this image, I think what draws me to this image are the reflections in the ends here, reflections of the room. And what I would want to do with this subject, I think, is try to tell a little bit of a story. Find an angle that presents a better reflection of what's going on in the room, and then have somebody maybe hanging up a hat, going in the process of hanging up a hat, showing as the reflection in the end. So that would then tell a little bit of a story and also convey what it is I'm looking at and take it out of the abstract realm or graphical realm and tell a little bit of a story. But that would be a completely different image. All right. Our next image is by Matt, and it's not showing any EXIF, but looking at it, we can see there's quite a bit of noise in this image. We could knock that all out. It wouldn't matter. I'm pretty sure we could pretty much smooth the crap out of this image and it wouldn't hurt it. And I guess that's a little bit of my problem with this image. Yes, it's a unique angle of a shot glass, but I don't really know that. It's not conveying a lot to me, and that's why I can smash it with noise reduction and it doesn't really hurt it at all. It's still just a graphical circle on a kind of smeary background. When I think about this subject, a shot glass, I would want this to be one of two things. It would either be a food type shot, product shot, or it would be a mood image. And if I were to take a picture of a shot glass from above that wasn't a product shot, then I'd want to tell something of a story, and for that it needs to be apparent that it is a shot glass. So I would probably want some whiskey in there, maybe a different glass, some whiskey in there, ice cubes, a darker image, kind of trying to convey a mood of sitting at a bar, looking down at your drink because you're depressed or whatever else. That's kind of where I would go with this subject. Like I said, either that or a more typical product shot, which wasn't the goal. Overall, for me, it meets the theme. It's a unique angle, but it's just lacking in any message, and it's not strong enough graphically for me. I put this as a C image. All right. Our next image is by Hayward. Again, I don't have the EXIF. It's interesting that this image was uploaded as a PNG, which is not normal what you want to put up on the web. PNGs are very acceptable. Most browsers display them, but JPEGs for the web are the better choice. Settings wise, faster shutter speed, I think, would have helped freeze a little more of that splash, make it a little crisper, stand out a little more obvious. Other than that, I don't really see any issues with this. It's definitely a unique perspective, looking down on a boat, unusual, kind of an aerial view. I know it was taken from a bridge. When I see this image, what I think of the full boat, the waves, and the wake as a smaller component in a large dark background. Kind of maybe using the boat and the waves and ripples behind it, the trail, to kind of convey a spaceship launching into space in a dark sky, that kind of thing. So in this case, I would go more towards abstract, because as it is, it's not really conveying a lot to me. But I think if you took the subject and transposed it and presented it as potentially a different subject, that would add additional interest to the image creatively. So that's what I would want to do. This image I put in the C range as well, and again it goes to what are we trying to convey, and I'm just not getting a lot from this image personally. Right, here we have an image by Ian, and this one I did transpose the EXIF information. It was a Pentax K1 with a 35mm set at f11, 1/40th of a second, ISO 100. Settings wise, aperture is about adequate. This is going out of focus. It's not really problematic. That's going out of focus, not really problematic. Shutter speed's pushing boundaries, but I don't see that being a problem. Couple things, I'd probably clean up the dust, little things like that prior to taking the image. It is a unique angle. For me, the blown out bulb is a detractor. I would want the exposure reduced, maybe even composite two images, depending upon how dark the rest of the image became. But I would want, if I'm taking a photo of a bulb, then I'm going to want there to be something interesting about it, something I can't normally see, don't normally see, and that would be the elements themselves glowing instead of just a white bulb. So I would want this exposure reduced quite a bit, at least on the bulb itself. So maybe compositing two images would have worked here. It looks like it could be a lens dust, whatever that could be, cloned pretty easily. There's several spots. Could be on the shade themselves, which could have been cleaned prior. Trying to decide how I feel about this image. I think this is in the C range. I think if the exposure of the bulb was showing me glowing elements instead of just being blown out, that would make it a stronger image, more towards the B range. I don't really see A potential in the subject as taken. The other side of that, though, is this could have potential commercial value, for an energy company or something like that. It's kind of odd, some of the things people will pay good money for, and I can see that this has that kind of potential. So it's not necessarily something, I would just scrap just because it doesn't say something to me personally. A good job there. And that looks like that was the last image for this month's submissions. As always, a lot of what I've said has been my opinion, and you should feel free to disregard. If you had a purpose or a reason, or it says something to you that it didn't to me, that's just as likely to be as valid, if not more valid, than what I've had to say. I hope what I've had to say is taken with that in mind and has been of some benefit. So until next time, I'm Stephen Kirsting, and I hope you have a great month.